Economy is an aspect that is always changing, but is never too different. We can always look back to the past to learn from it. The eras from 1976 to 1996 were an era where there were many ups and downs. We can look to this era so we can learn how not to fuel these ups and downs. This era, especially the 80s, was a product of decisions made. The 70s were an interesting time to explore because it paints a picture for how rocky the 80s were. We can start in 1976. In April of 1976, Apple was founded. Apple was and still is a global superpower. Another important event in the 70s would be the Marquette National Bank of Minneapolis, the first Omaha Service Corps in 1978. This is a very important event because it talked about interest rates and how it affects the economy. This basically said that credit card companies can charge interest rates based on where they are located. This increased the interest rates on credit cards, and this can also be attributed to being part of the reason for an increase in debt. This increase in debt caused a recession that we will examine later. Another major event in 1978 would be the Iranian Revolution. The revolution caused the price of oil to go up because of the lack of stability. This shows that affairs that happen outside the US have just as much of an influence over the economy in the US. The price of oil went up to $40 per barrel. While the 70s were an interesting time period, the 70s were only a foreshadowing for the 80s. The 80s were full of the up and downs that make up the business cycle. The 80s were a product of the fiscal policies of the time. In 1981, Ronald Reagan took office and his fiscal policies were given a name: Reaganomics. Reaganomics called for widespread tax cuts, decreased social spending, increased military spending, and the deregulation of domestic markets. There was a recession that began in 1981 because of the new economic policies, and also because of the prior negative trends in the economy due to the oil prices going up. Reagan's reforms were fueling this recession. The unemployment rate went up to 10.8%, which can cause low productivity. If the nation has high unemployment rates, then they are not as productive as can be. They won't get as much done, and there will be less spending that will cause more people to lose jobs, and then they will enter a recession. Productivity can be measured by GDP. A country's GDP can help predict its well-being. To counter the recession, Reagan proposed a tax cut. Congress passed President Reagan's tax cut legislation, which was the largest tax cut in the nation's history. It was expected to save the taxpayers $750 billion over the next 5 years. This increased the amount of money that is liquid. When consumers have more money, they can spend more. When they spend more, that keeps the economy running. How much consumers spend shows how the economy is doing, because it shows how willing the consumers are on spending money. When times are hard, people tend to save. After this recession, the economy went through the cycle and ended up being in a Goldilocks economy. This was in 1983 when everything was better. This was a span of time that occurred from 1983 up until the next recession. This was a time period when there was not too much inflation or too high unemployment. In this time period, there were many events that showed how great the economy was. In 1984, we had the LA Olympics and the New Orleans World Exposition. We also had technological advances with the Macintosh being released. Everything seemed to be going good up until 1987 when the stock market crashed. It was October 19th, 1987. This was called Black Monday. Stock markets crashed all around the world. The Dow fell over 20% in one day. This is the largest one-day loss in the Dow. This is a signal that the economy is not doing good if the stock market crashes. That was one dramatic way to end 1980s.
That was a way to end the 80s. With that ending, it became the 90s. The 90s were a technological centered era. We later entered another recession in 1990. This recession was caused by Iraq invading Kuwait and rising oil prices, the debt we had from the 1980s because of reduced taxes and constant borrowing of money, and Black Monday, which was a stock market crash. Then, to counteract this recession, we went to war with Iraq to get them out of Kuwait, which was a part of the Gulf War. Later on in 1991, on an unrelated note, the internet was made public. The internet helps to make the economy run nowadays. The internet provides $300 billion to the U.S. economy. If not for the internet, a lot of big companies nowadays would not exist, such as Amazon and Google. In 1993, the NAFTA was signed. NAFTA is what promotes free trade between Canada, USA, and Mexico. This increased our imports and exports. In 1995, online banking became common, which now makes it easier to make purchases. A very important event to cap things off would be Amazon and eBay being formed. They signify the beginning of online business. This is important as it causes there to be more ease in buying, and online buying has become such a staple nowadays.
It is important to learn from the past, that way we cannot make mistakes that we've made before. This is why it's important to look into the past economic cycles, that way we can learn from the past to make the future better.